The flashing red and blue lights in the rearview mirror are a universal symbol of anxiety. But for a 17-year-old black teenager, alone on a dark, affluent suburban road, they can feel like a death sentence. Officer Darren Mitchell thought he had pulled over just another easy target, someone he could bully, belittle and break for his own twisted amusement. He thought his badge was an impenetrable shield, and his patrol route was his personal kingdom. But what Mitchell didn't know was that the terrified teenager sitting behind the wheel was holding a royal flush, and the entire agonizing encounter was being broadcast in high definition to the absolute last person on Earth a corrupt cop would ever want watching. This is the story of a routine traffic stop that ended a career, shattered a corrupt system, and proved that karma doesn't just bite, it devours. The dashboard clock glowed 11:14 p.m. Jamal Crawford kept his eyes locked on the winding asphalt of Oak Ridge Drive, his hands positioned precisely at 10 and 2 on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. He was exhausted. He had just finished a grueling 9-hour shift at a local tech repair shop, a job he worked every weekend to save up for his freshman year tuition at Georgetown University. The car he was driving wasn't his. It was a pristine, midnight blue, 2023 Chrysler 300, a vehicle his older brother Elijah had recently purchased after landing a lucrative engineering contract. Elijah had lent it to Jamal for the weekend as a reward for his recent straight A report card. The car hummed smoothly, a stark contrast to the rattling hand-me-down sedan Jamal usually drove. He felt a sense of pride driving it, a fleeting taste of the success he was working so relentlessly to achieve. 2 miles behind him, tucked into the shadows of an abandoned strip mall exit, sat Car 42 of the Oak Ridge Police Department. Inside sat Officer Darren Mitchell. Mitchell was a 15-year veteran of the force, a man whose career was defined by an alarming number of civilian complaints that somehow always disappeared into the bureaucratic void of internal affairs. He was a man deeply entrenched in his own prejudices, viewing the wealthy, predominantly white neighborhood of Oak Ridge as his personal fortress to defend against outsiders. As Jamal's midnight blue Chrysler glided past Mitchell's hiding spot, doing exactly 2 miles under the 45-mile-per-hour speed limit, Mitchell's eyes narrowed. The streetlights briefly illuminated the driver's seat. Mitchell saw a young black male in a high-end vehicle. In Mitchell's warped worldview, this equation only had 2 possible answers. The car was stolen, or it was bought with dirty money. "Look at this," Mitchell muttered to his rookie partner, Kevin Rostover, who was nervously tapping away on the patrol car's computer. "We got a live one. Kid thinks he owns the road." "Running the plates now, Darren," Kevin said, his voice tight. "Plates are clean, registered to an Elijah Crawford. No warrants, no flags." "Clean just means they haven't been caught yet," Mitchell scoffed, throwing the cruiser into drive. "Let's see how he handles a little pressure." Mitchell pulled out, his tires screeching slightly against the pavement, and accelerated until he was riding inches from Jamal's rear bumper. Inside the Chrysler, Jamal's heart plummeted into his stomach. He checked his speedometer. 42. He checked his mirrors. The aggressive proximity of the headlights behind him was blinding. "Just stay calm," he told himself, repeating the survival rules his father had drilled into his head since he was 10 years old. No sudden movements. Be polite. Comply. For 2 agonizing miles, Mitchell tailed him, looking for the slightest deviation, a tire touching a painted line, a delayed turn signal. Jamal drove flawlessly, hyper-focused, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead, despite the cool air conditioning. Frustrated by the lack of a legal pretext, Mitchell decided he didn't need one. He flicked the switch. The sirens wailed, and the strobe lights ignited the dark suburban street in violent flashes of crimson and sapphire. Jamal immediately activated his right turn signal, slowly pulling over onto the wide shoulder of the road. He threw the car into park, turned off the engine, turned on the interior dome light, and rolled down all 4 windows. He placed both of his hands flat on top of the steering wheel, interlacing his fingers. He was breathing heavily, trying to swallow the lump of pure dread forming in his throat. In the cruiser, Mitchell unbuckled his seatbelt. "Watch and learn, rookie," he said, tapping his chest. With a deliberate, practiced motion, Mitchell reached up and clicked off his body camera. The small red recording light died. "Sometimes these things just malfunction," he smirked at Kevin. "Gotta rely on good old-fashioned police work." Kevin swallowed hard, knowing exactly what that meant, but remained silent. He had been on the force for 3 weeks. He wasn't about to cross a senior officer. Mitchell stepped out of the cruiser, adjusting his heavy utility belt, and began the long, slow walk toward the Chrysler, placing his hand firmly on the grip of his holstered sidearm. The crunch of heavy boots on the gravel shoulder echoed loudly in the quiet night. Mitchell didn't approach the driver's window directly. He lingered near the rear bumper, pressing his hand against the trunk to leave a fingerprint. A standard procedure, but executed with an intimidating slowness. Finally, he materialized in Jamal's peripheral vision, shining a blinding, 1,000-lumen tactical flashlight directly into the teenager's eyes. Jamal winced, squinting against the harsh glare, but kept his hands firmly planted on the wheel. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Mitchell barked. There was no "good evening," no explanation for the stop, just a harsh, demanding bark. "Yes, sir," Jamal said, his voice remarkably steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "My license is in my back right pocket. The registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. I need to move my hands to get them." Mitchell lowered the flashlight slightly, just enough to illuminate Jamal's face. He let out a condescending chuckle. "Listen to you. Sounds like you've rehearsed this. You got a lot of practice getting pulled over, boy." The word boy hung in the air, thick and loaded with centuries of venom. Jamal felt a spike of anger, but he forced it down. "No, sir. I just want to make sure you know what I'm doing." "Just get the papers, and move slow," Mitchell commanded, resting his hand on his weapon again. Jamal slowly reached into his back pocket with 2 fingers, extracted his wallet, and handed over his license. He then leaned over, opened the glove compartment, and retrieved the paperwork, handing it to the officer. Mitchell snatched the documents. He shone his light on the license, then on the registration. "Jamal Crawford," he read aloud, dragging out the syllables. He looked at the registration. "Elijah Crawford. Who's Elijah? Your dealer?" "Elijah is my older brother, sir," Jamal replied, maintaining eye contact. "It's his car." "Right. Your brother," Mitchell sneered, leaning closer to the window. The smell of stale coffee and peppermint gum wafted into the car. "And what does your brother do to afford a $50,000 ride? Because I know people who work real jobs in this town who can't afford this leather. He's a software engineer, sir. He works for—" "I didn't ask for his resume," Mitchell snapped, cutting him off. He stepped back and swept the flashlight over the interior of the car, lingering on a Georgetown University hoodie resting on the passenger seat. "Georgetown, huh? You steal that from the lost and found?" "I was accepted there for the fall semester, sir. I'm starting in September." Mitchell laughed, a harsh, barking sound that echoed in the quiet street. "Georgetown? Sure you are. You know what I think. I think you're rolling through my town looking for houses to hit. I think you're using this fancy stolen car to blend in." "The car isn't stolen, sir. You can run the plates, and I'm just driving home from work." "Don't you tell me how to do my job." Mitchell's voice rose, the manufactured rage taking over. He wanted a reaction. He needed Jamal to talk back, to raise his voice, to give him an excuse to escalate the situation. "Step out of the vehicle." Jamal froze. "Sir, respectfully, why do I need to step out of the vehicle? Was I speeding?" "I said step out of the damn car," Mitchell shouted, his hand dropping to the handle of his door. "You are refusing a lawful order. I will pull you through this window if I have to." "I am complying, sir," Jamal said quickly, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "I'm taking my seatbelt off. I'm opening the door." Jamal stepped out into the chill of the night air. He was a tall kid, standing at 6'1", which only seemed to agitate Mitchell further. "Turn around, hands on the roof," Mitchell ordered. Jamal turned and placed his hands flat on the cool metal of the car's roof. Mitchell approached from behind and aggressively kicked Jamal's legs apart, much harder than necessary. He began a rough pat-down, his hands sliding up Jamal's legs and torso, deliberately squeezing and pushing. "What have you got in the car, Jamal?" Mitchell whispered, his voice dangerously close to Jamal's ear. "Weapons? Narcotics? You know I'm going to find it, right? I can smell the weed from here." "I don't smoke, sir. There's nothing illegal in the car." "We'll see about that," Mitchell said, stepping back. "Sit on the curb. Don't move." Jamal walked over to the concrete curb and sat down, his hands resting on his knees. He looked over at the patrol car. Officer Rostova was standing by the open passenger door, looking pale and deeply uncomfortable, but making no move to intervene. Mitchell leaned into the open window of the Chrysler and began aggressively tearing through the center console, tossing CDs, charging cables, and spare change onto the passenger seat. What Officer Darren Mitchell did not know, what he could not possibly fathom in his arrogant assumption of total control, was that the Chrysler 300 was not just a luxury vehicle. Elijah Crawford was a software engineer who specialized in automotive security systems. Tucked seamlessly behind the rearview mirror, integrated so perfectly it looked like a factory sensor, was a state-of-the-art dual-lens 4K dashcam. It was hardwired to the car's battery and linked to a hidden mobile hotspot. The outward-facing lens captured the street. The inward-facing lens, equipped with infrared night vision, captured the entire cabin. And more importantly, it was actively live-streaming to a secure cloud server and sending a real-time emergency alert to a specific contact on Elijah's phone. While Mitchell was elbow-deep in the Chrysler's glove box, ripping out the vehicle manual and scattering napkins across the floorboards, Jamal sat on the curb, taking slow, measured breaths. He refused to give the officer the satisfaction of seeing him break down. Inside the car, the infotainment screen on the dashboard was completely black, a feature Elijah had programmed into the car's "Do Not Disturb" driving mode. But behind that black screen, a Bluetooth call was actively connected. 10 minutes before the lights flashed, Jamal had been on the phone with his uncle. Not just any uncle. Richard Hayes. Richard Hayes was not a man you wanted as an enemy. He was the recently appointed district attorney for the very county Oak Ridge resided in. Known for his ruthless prosecution of organized crime and his zero-tolerance policy for police corruption, Hayes was a legal titan with a reputation that made police unions sweat. Jamal had called him to ask for advice on a college essay. When the sirens wailed, Jamal hadn't hung up. He had simply placed his phone face down in the cup holder. Miles away, in his home office, District Attorney Richard Hayes sat frozen at his mahogany desk, his phone on speaker. The audio was crystal clear. He had heard the initial approach. He had heard the word boy. He had heard the mockery of Georgetown. He had heard the aggressive, unlawful order to exit the vehicle. Hayes's knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of his desk. He had already hit the record button on his secondary digital audio recorder. Using his landline, He was silently dialing the personal cell phone of the Chief of Police, David Reynolds. Back on the street, Mitchell pulled his head out of the car, frustrated. There were no drugs. There were no weapons. Just clean upholstery and a faint smell of new car leather. He walked over to Jamal, shining the flashlight back into the boy's face. "You think you're pretty smart, don't you?" Mitchell spat. "You think because you got some fancy clothes and a clean car, you're better than the thugs I lock up every night? You're all the same. You just hide it better." "Sir, can I have my license back?" Jamal asked calmly. "If you aren't writing me a ticket, I'd like to go home." "You go home when I say you go home," Mitchell roared, stepping into Jamal's personal space, towering over the seated teenager. "I could lock you up right now for resisting. I could impound this vehicle for a thorough K-9 search. I could ruin that little college dream of yours with one phone call." Officer Rostover finally took a step forward. "Darren," he said quietly, "maybe we should just issue a warning and let him go. The car's clean." Mitchell whipped around, glaring at his partner. "Shut your mouth, Kevin. You want to pass your probationary period. Then you learn how the real world works. These kids need to be taught a lesson in respect. They need to know who owns these streets." Mitchell turned his attention back to Jamal. He reached down and violently grabbed Jamal by the collar of his shirt, yanking him up from the curb. Jamal stumbled forward, his hands instinctively coming up to protect his face. "Hey, don't touch me!" "Resisting!" Mitchell yelled, immediately sweeping Jamal's legs out from under him. Jamal hit the asphalt hard, his shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. Before he could process the pain, Mitchell drove his knee sharply into Jamal's lower back, pinning him to the ground. The cold steel of handcuffs ratcheted tightly around Jamal's wrists, biting into his skin. "Stop! I'm not resisting!" Jamal cried out, his voice cracking with panic and pain for the first time. "I didn't do anything!" "You breathed my air, punk!" Mitchell sneered, leaning his weight into his knee, ignoring Jamal's gasp of pain. "Let's see how much that Georgetown brain helps you when you're sitting in holding." In his home office, District Attorney Richard Hayes stood up, his chair crashing backward to the floor. The line to the police chief had connected. "David," Hayes said, his voice a lethal, vibrating whisper of pure rage. "I need 2 of your internal affairs sergeants and a supervisor at Oak Ridge Drive and Elm. Right now." "Richard, it's almost midnight. What's going on?" Chief Reynolds asked, startled by the late hour and the DA's tone. "One of your officers, a Darren Mitchell, is currently assaulting my 17-year-old nephew on a baseless traffic stop," Hayes said, his eyes burning as he stared at the speakerphone. "And David, I have the entire thing recorded. You have exactly 4 minutes to get someone there before I call the FBI." Back on the dark street, Mitchell hauled Jamal to his feet by the chain of the handcuffs. He shoved the boy against the side of the police cruiser. "You're going away for a long time, kid," Mitchell whispered, a sick smile playing on his lips. He was completely unaware that the invisible net had already been cast, and the jaws of a trap he had built with his own arrogance were about to snap shut. The back of a police cruiser is a uniquely suffocating environment. It smells of industrial disinfectant, stale sweat, and the lingering despair of 1,000 prior occupants. For 17-year-old Jamal Crawford, shoved forcefully onto the hard plastic bench, it felt like a coffin. His right shoulder throbbed with a dull, sickening ache where it had slammed against the asphalt, and the steel handcuffs dug mercilessly into his wrists, cutting off the circulation to his fingers. He stared through the metal mesh dividing the front and rear compartments, his breath fogging the plexiglass. Outside, Officer Darren Mitchell was strutting back and forth in front of the Chrysler, high on the adrenaline of his own unchecked power. Mitchell opened the driver's side door of the cruiser and slid behind the wheel, letting out a heavy sigh of satisfaction. He adjusted his duty belt and looked over at Kevin Rostover, who was sitting rigid in the passenger seat, his face drained of color. "All right, rookie, get your notepad out," Mitchell commanded, his voice dripping with condescension. "Here's how we write this up. Suspect was exhibiting erratic driving behavior. Pulled him over. He was verbally combative, refused lawful orders to remain in the vehicle, and when I attempted a routine pat-down for officer safety, he became physically aggressive." Kevin stared at his senior officer, horror warring with self-preservation in his wide eyes. "Darren, he didn't do any of that. He was completely compliant. He was just sitting on the curb." Mitchell's demeanor shifted instantly from smug to menacing. He leaned across the center console, invading Kevin's space. "Listen to me very carefully, Rostover. In this job, it's us against them. You want to survive? You back your partner. My body cam malfunctioned. Yours didn't catch the angle. So what happened is exactly what I say happened." The kid lunged at me. I executed a standard takedown. He's catching a resisting arrest charge, maybe an assault on an officer if I feel my back twinge tomorrow. You got it? Kevin swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked back at Jamal through the mesh, then back to Mitchell. Before he could formulate a response, the darkness of Oak Ridge Drive was suddenly shattered by a blinding wash of high-intensity headlights. Mitchell squinted in the rearview mirror. What the hell is this? It wasn't one car. It was 3 unmarked, heavy-duty black SUVs, their grills flashing with synchronized red and blue strobe lights. They didn't approach slowly. They swarmed the scene in a highly coordinated, aggressive maneuver, boxing in both the Chrysler and Mitchell's patrol car so tightly that Mitchell couldn't have pulled away if he tried. The doors of the SUVs flew open simultaneously. 5 men stepped out onto the asphalt. They weren't wearing the standard Oak Ridge Patrol uniforms. They wore tactical vests over dress shirts, their badges hanging from heavy chains around their necks. "Internal affairs," Mitchell whispered, a sudden cold knot forming in his gut. But he quickly forced it down. "No way," he rationalized. "It's midnight. They don't roll out like this for a routine traffic stop. They must be tracking the Chrysler. I was right. The kid is tied to something huge." Determined to play the hero, Mitchell kicked his door open and stepped out, pasting on a confident, commanding expression. "Evening, gentlemen," he called out, resting his hand casually on his belt. "You guys tracking this vehicle? I just secured the driver. He got a little combative, had to put him on the pavement, but the scene is locked down." The lead officer, Sergeant Gregory Wilkes, a 20-year veteran with a reputation for mercilessly hunting dirty cops, didn't even look at Mitchell. He walked right past him, his eyes fixed on the back of the patrol car. Following closely behind Wilkes was Lieutenant Harrison Briggs, the shift commander for the entire district. Briggs's face was set in stone. "Lieutenant Briggs," Mitchell said, his smile faltering slightly as the men ignored him. "I'm writing up the 148 right now. Suspect resisted." "Shut your mouth, Mitchell," Briggs snapped, his voice cracking through the night air like a bullwhip. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. The quiet, lethal authority in his tone made Mitchell freeze in his tracks. Wilkes reached the rear door of the cruiser and yanked it open. He shined a soft penlight into the back seat, illuminating Jamal's terrified, tear-streaked face. "Jamal Crawford?" Wilkes asked, his voice entirely different from the harsh barks Mitchell had been using. It was calm, professional, and remarkably gentle. "Yes, sir," Jamal choked out, trying to sit up straighter despite the pain in his shoulder. "Are you injured, son?" "My shoulder hurts, sir, and my wrists. The cuffs are really tight." "We're going to get those off you right now," Wilkes assured him. He turned his head and barked over his shoulder. "Briggs, get the keys from Mitchell, now." Mitchell was standing by the trunk, utterly bewildered. "Wait, what?" "Lieutenant, with all due respect, this is my suspect. He assaulted me. You can't just uncuff him." "Give me the keys, Darren," Briggs ordered, stepping into Mitchell's personal space. Before Mitchell could argue further, another set of headlights pierced the scene. A sleek, charcoal-grey luxury sedan slid to a halt just behind the wall of SUVs. The driver's side door opened, and a tall, impeccably dressed man stepped out into the chaotic flashing lights. He wore a tailored navy suit, but his tie was loosened, and his eyes burned with a fury that could melt steel. It was District Attorney Richard Hayes. As Hayes strode into the illumination of the streetlights, Mitchell's breath caught in his throat. Every cop in the county knew the DA. He was the man who signed their warrants, the man who prosecuted their cases, and the man who had indicted 3 corrupt officers in the past 2 years alone. Hayes didn't look at Mitchell. He didn't look at Briggs. He walked straight past the wall of authority figures, straight to the open door of the patrol car. "Uncle Richard," Jamal gasped, his voice breaking completely at the sight of family. "I'm here, Jay," Hayes said softly, leaning into the cruiser. He looked at the awkward, painful angle of Jamal's arms. He spun around, his eyes locking onto Sergeant Wilkes. "Why is my nephew still in chains, Sergeant?" "Keys, Mitchell!" Briggs roared, abandoning his quiet authority. "Hand them over right damn now." Trembling slightly, Mitchell fumbled at his belt, unclipped his keyring, and handed it to Briggs. The lieutenant tossed them to Wilkes, who quickly unlocked the heavy steel cuffs. Jamal let out a sharp cry of pain as his arms fell forward, rubbing his deeply bruised wrists. Hayes gently helped the teenager out of the suffocating back seat, pulling him into a tight, protective embrace right there on the asphalt. Mitchell stood paralyzed. His brain was misfiring, desperately trying to construct a reality where he survived this. His nephew. The DA's nephew. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. But he was a veteran cop. His survival instinct was to double down, to control the narrative. "Mr. Hayes," Mitchell started, taking a step forward, his voice a desperate mix of defensive posturing and forced respect. "I didn't know he was your nephew. But you have to understand, he was driving erratically. When I pulled him over, he refused to follow commands. He took a swing at me. I had to use force to subdue him. It's officer safety." Hayes slowly pulled away from Jamal, keeping one hand reassuringly on the boy's uninjured shoulder. He turned to face Officer Darren Mitchell. The look on the district attorney's face was not just angry, it was predatory. It was the look of a man who held all the cards and was about to burn the entire table down. The silence that followed Mitchell's statement was deafening, save for the rhythmic clicking of the police cruiser's flashing light bars. The night air had grown significantly colder, but sweat was suddenly pouring down Mitchell's forehead, stinging his eyes. Lieutenant Briggs and Sergeant Wilkes stood perfectly still, their expressions unreadable masks of professional detachment, watching the district attorney step forward. "Let me make sure I understand you perfectly, Officer Mitchell," Hayes said, his voice deadly quiet, enunciating every single syllable with razor-sharp precision. "You are officially stating, right here, in front of your shift commander and an internal affairs sergeant, that my nephew, a straight-A student with no criminal record, physically attacked an armed police officer during a routine traffic stop?" Mitchell swallowed the dry lump in his throat. He glanced at Kevin Rostova, who was still sitting in the passenger seat of the cruiser, staring straight ahead, paralyzed. Mitchell knew he was in too deep to back out now. If he admitted he lied about the assault, his career was over anyway. His only play was his word against a teenager's. And in his 15 years on the force, a cop's word always won. "Yes, sir," Mitchell lied, standing taller, trying to project authority. He became aggressive. I was forced to perform a defensive takedown. It's a tragic misunderstanding, but the law is the law. I'm sure we can clear this up quietly, given your connection to the boy. It was a blatant offer to sweep it under the rug, an olive branch wrapped in a threat. Hayes didn't blink. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew his smartphone. He tapped the screen a few times, bringing up an audio file. "It's a fascinating thing about modern technology, Darren," Hayes said, using the officer's first name to strip away his badge and authority. "You see, Jamal and I were on the phone discussing his college admissions essays when you pulled him over." He had his phone connected to the car's Bluetooth. Mitchell's stomach plummeted. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickly, ashen grey. "He placed the phone in the cup holder," Hayes continued, his voice echoing in the quiet street. "He didn't hang up. He just left the line open. I heard the entire interaction." Hayes pressed play on his phone, holding it up. The audio was pristine. Mitchell's own voice, loud, aggressive, and dripping with racial animus, filled the night air. "Who's Elijah? Your dealer? You steal that from the lost and found? I think you're rolling through my town looking for houses to hit." Jamal's calm, respectful responses played in stark contrast to the officer's escalating, manufactured rage. Then came the physical altercation, the sound of Mitchell yelling, "Resisting!" The sickening thud of Jamal hitting the pavement, the teenager's cry of pain, and Mitchell's whispered, sickening threat. "You breathed my air, punk. Let's see how much that Georgetown brain helps you when you're sitting in holding." Hayes paused the recording. The silence returned, infinitely heavier than before. Mitchell took a step back, his hands shaking. That audio is out of context. You can't see what was happening. He lunged at me, I swear to God. My body camera malfunctioned, but my partner saw it. Mitchell pointed a desperate, trembling finger at the cruiser. "Rostova! Tell them he lunged!" Everyone turned to look at the rookie officer. Kevin Rostova slowly opened the passenger door and stepped out. He looked at Mitchell, the man who had ordered him to lie just 10 minutes ago. He looked at the internal affairs officers, and finally he looked at Jamal, who was rubbing his bruised wrists, looking utterly exhausted. Kevin raised his hand slightly in a gesture of surrender. "Lieutenant Briggs," Kevin said, his voice shaking but growing steadier with every word. Officer Mitchell's body camera did not malfunction. He intentionally deactivated it before stepping out of the vehicle. He stated he wanted to do good old-fashioned police work. The suspect was completely compliant. He never raised his voice. He never resisted. Officer Mitchell grabbed him by the collar, swept his legs, and drove his knee into his back without provocation, and then he ordered me to falsify the police report. "You lying rat!" Mitchell screamed, lunging toward Kevin. Before Mitchell could take a second step, Sergeant Wilkes and another IA officer were on him, grabbing his arms and slamming him hard against the hood of his own patrol car. "Don't move, Mitchell," Wilkes barked, pinning him down. "That's not all," Hayes said, his voice cutting through the scuffle. He walked over to the midnight blue Chrysler and pointed through the windshield at the rear-view mirror housing. "My nephew, Elijah, the man whose name is on that registration, he builds automotive security architecture. This vehicle is equipped with a dual-lens, continuous recording 4K dashcam system. It streams directly to a secure cloud server. The outward lens caught your illegal approach. The cabin lens, equipped with a wide-angle view, caught your illegal search of the vehicle, and it caught your unprovoked, violent assault on a minor." Hayes turned back to Mitchell, who was now pinned to the hood, gasping for air, his eyes wide with the realization that his life as he knew it was over. "I have the audio. I have the video. I have the eyewitness testimony of your own partner, Hayes stated, his voice devoid of mercy. You thought you were a predator hunting in the dark, but you walked into a floodlight, Darren. Lieutenant Briggs stepped forward, unclipping a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his own belt. Officer Darren Mitchell, give me your badge, and give me your sidearm. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Wilkes roughly patted Mitchell down, stripping him of his Glock, his taser, and pulling the gold badge from his chest. Put your hands behind your back, Briggs ordered. Mitchell, a man who had spent 15 years wielding handcuffs as a tool of intimidation and control, squeezed his eyes shut as his arms were wrenched backward. The familiar, cold bite of the steel ratcheting tight around his wrists was poetic justice, but it brought him no comfort. Darren Mitchell, Briggs recited, his voice completely devoid of emotion. You are under arrest for assault under color of authority, false arrest, official misconduct, and subornation of perjury. You have the right to remain silent. If you have any sense left in your head, I suggest you use it. As Mitchell was hauled away and shoved into the back of an unmarked IA vehicle, destined for the same suffocating, humiliating ride he had just forced upon an innocent teenager, District Attorney Hayes turned back to his nephew. Jamal was watching the cruiser pull away, his chest heaving as the adrenaline finally began to recede, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. It's over, Jamal, Hayes said softly, wrapping his arm around the boy's uninjured shoulder, guiding him toward the sleek charcoal sedan. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. You stayed calm. You survived. He just hated me, Uncle Richard, Jamal whispered, the trauma of the event finally breaking through his stoic facade. Just for existing. I know, kid, Hayes said, his jaw tightening as he looked at the flashing red and blue lights fading down the dark suburban road. But tonight, he learned that the world doesn't belong to him anymore. Let's get you to a hospital to check that shoulder, and then let's get you home. The morning after the arrest, the sun rose over Oak Ridge with a deceptive calmness, completely ignorant of the institutional earthquake that had occurred in the dead of night. Inside the Crawford household, however, there was no peace. Jamal sat at the kitchen island, a bag of frozen peas pressed against his heavily bruised shoulder, silently watching his older brother, Elijah, type furiously away at his custom-built workstation. Elijah's eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't slept. When he received the automated distress ping from the Chrysler's security system at 11:22 p.m., he had remotely accessed the live feed. He had watched, helpless and enraged, as his little brother was thrown to the asphalt. I've compiled the raw files, Elijah said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He didn't look away from the monitors. The outward view, the cabin view, the infrared, and the synchronized audio track. I've also isolated Mitchell's metadata. The dashcam system logged the exact GPS coordinates and timestamps of every aggressive maneuver he made before he even turned his sirens on. District Attorney Richard Hayes sat across from Jamal, nursing a black coffee. He looked at Elijah. The police department is going to try to embargo that footage, pending their internal investigation. They'll claim it's evidence and attempt to seal it to control the public narrative. Elijah finally stopped typing. He turned his chair around, a bitter, humorless smile touching his lips. Uncle Richard, with all due respect to the legal process, that footage belongs to me. It was recorded on my private servers, from my private property. And as of 10 seconds ago, a synchronized high-definition supercut of Officer Darren Mitchell's greatest hits was securely emailed to the news desks of the New York Times, CNN, the Washington Post, and every local affiliate in this state. Hayes didn't reprimand him. In fact, he took a slow sip of his coffee and nodded. Good. Let them burn. By noon, the digital wildfire had consumed the nation. The Oak Ridge Police Department, usually a sleepy, well-funded suburban precinct, found itself under a terrifying global microscope. The video was everywhere. It was trending #1 on every social media platform. What made it so undeniably explosive was the stark, undeniable contrast it presented. The terrifying, unprovoked aggression of a veteran officer against the textbook compliance of a terrified teenager, all overlaid with the sickening, crystal-clear audio of Mitchell's racist taunts. Chief of Police David Reynolds was completely blindsided. He had planned a quiet press conference to announce a suspension pending investigation for a procedural error. Instead, he walked into a briefing room packed wall to wall with sweating, shouting reporters. Chief Reynolds, does Oak Ridge PD train its officers to deactivate their body cameras before assaulting minors? Shouted Sarah Jenkins, a Pulitzer-winning investigative journalist for the State Chronicle. Is it standard procedure to ask citizens if their college sweatshirts were stolen? Yelled another. Reynolds gripped the podium, looking visibly aged. The Oak Ridge Police Department takes these allegations very seriously. The officer in question, Darren Mitchell, has been terminated effectively immediately, stripped of his badge, and is currently sitting in a county jail cell without bail. We are cooperating fully with the district attorney's office. He was interrupted by Frank Gallagher, the combative president of the local police union, who pushed his way to the microphones. Gallagher, unaware that Elijah had released the interior cabin footage showing Jamal's hands on the wheel, decided to play the only card he knew: defense. Let's not rush to judgment, Gallagher barked, his face red. Officer Mitchell is a decorated 15-year veteran. Traffic stops are highly volatile situations. We only have one angle. We don't know what that suspect was doing inside the car. He could have been reaching for a weapon. Mitchell had a split second to make a life or death decision to execute a defensive takedown. The room fell dead silent. Sarah Jenkins held up her tablet, the screen facing Gallagher. She pressed play. The pristine 4K infrared footage from the Chrysler's cabin played loudly through her device's speakers. It showed Jamal, hands laced perfectly over the steering wheel, speaking politely before being violently yanked from his seat. We have the inside angle, Mr. Gallagher, Jenkins said coldly. He was reaching for his registration. Do you consider a piece of paper a lethal weapon? Or is it just the color of the driver's skin that Officer Mitchell found threatening? Gallagher stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. The union's defense crumbled on live television. The narrative was dead, and Darren Mitchell was completely isolated. The wheels of justice are notoriously slow, grinding fine and without mercy, but public outrage acts as a spectacular accelerant. 10 months after the flashing lights first illuminated that midnight blue Chrysler on Oak Ridge Drive, Darren Mitchell found himself sitting at the defense table in a heavily guarded, wood-paneled federal courtroom. He was entirely unrecognizable. The swaggering, arrogant predator who had patrolled the affluent suburbs like a feudal lord was gone. Stripped of his tailored uniform, his heavy utility belt, and the badge that had shielded his malice for a decade and a half, Mitchell looked alarmingly small. He wore an off-the-rack, ill-fitting grey suit that hung loosely on his frame. His posture was slumped, his shoulders rounded, and his face was gaunt and deeply lined from months spent in the suffocating isolation of protective custody. The police union, which had initially roared in his defense, had completely abandoned him within 48 hours of Elijah Crawford releasing the unedited, multi-angle dashcam footage. Mitchell was left with a court-appointed defense attorney, William Brentwood, a perpetually exhausted man who looked like he would rather be anywhere else on Earth than defending the most hated ex-cop in the country. Because District Attorney Richard Hayes had officially recused himself from the criminal proceedings due to his familial connection, the prosecution was handed over to Catherine Dubois. Dubois was a legendary special prosecutor brought in directly from the Department of Justice, a woman famous for dismantling corrupt police precincts with surgical, terrifying precision. The trial was not a battle, it was a massacre. Dubois didn't just present the video to the jury, she used it as a foundational slab to build a horrifying portrait of a man who had weaponized his authority. She walked the jury through the timeline, second by second, highlighting the exact moment Mitchell intentionally deactivated his body camera. She played the pristine audio of Mitchell's racist taunts, letting the vile words echo in the dead silence of the courtroom. But the dashcam footage was merely the key that unlocked Pandora's box. The most devastating blow, the twist that ensured Mitchell would never see the outside of a cell again, came on the fourth day of the trial. "The state calls former officer Kevin Rostova to the stand," Dubois announced, her voice ringing clear across the gallery. Mitchell's head snapped up, his jaw clenching so hard his teeth audibly ground together. He watched his former rookie partner walk down the center aisle. Rostova had resigned from the Oak Ridge Force a mere week after the incident, profoundly sickened by the reality of the brotherhood he had once idolized. Facing accessory charges himself, Rostova had accepted a sweeping immunity deal from the federal government in exchange for his absolute, unvarnished cooperation. Under Dubois' masterful, methodical questioning, Rostova didn't just corroborate the events of May 14th. He took a sledgehammer to the blue wall of silence. He testified about Mitchell's explicit instructions to falsify the official police report while Jamal was handcuffed in the back seat. He testified about Mitchell's habitual use of racial slurs when the precinct doors were closed. But Dubois had dug much deeper, and the hard karma was about to hit with the force of a freight train. "Mr. Rostova," Dubois said, stepping out from behind the podium and pacing slowly in front of the jury box. "During your extensive debriefings with the FBI, you were asked to review several of Mr. Mitchell's past arrest reports spanning back 7 years, where suspects consistently claimed Officer Mitchell had planted narcotics in their vehicles to justify asset forfeiture. Did you uncover anything during your brief time riding in his patrol car that sheds light on these allegations?" Brentwood jumped to his feet, knocking his pen to the floor. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. My client is on trial for the events concerning Jamal Crawford, not past, unproven allegations from convicted felons. It goes directly to a pattern of systemic, deliberate abuse under the color of authority, Your Honor," Dubois countered smoothly, not even looking at the defense attorney. "And it establishes the defendant's exact motive for disabling his body camera on the night in question. He was preparing to utilize tools he kept hidden for precisely this purpose." Judge Harrison Caldwell, a stern, unforgiving magistrate with zero tolerance for public corruption, leaned forward. "Overruled. The witness will answer the question." Kevin took a shaky breath and looked directly at Mitchell. Mitchell's eyes were wide, pleading, and terrified. "During my 3rd week riding with him," Kevin said, his voice echoing in the rapt courtroom, "Darren Mitchell showed me a hidden, aftermarket compartment he had installed in his primary duty bag. He kept small, pre-weighed baggies of methamphetamine, a rusted box cutter, and an unregistered, defaced .38 caliber revolver. He laughed about it. He called it his insurance policy for when he pulled over someone he, quote, knew belonged in a cage but couldn't legally prove it." The courtroom erupted. Gasps echoed from the gallery. The press pool furiously hammered away at their laptops, broadcasting the revelation to the world. Mitchell buried his face in his trembling hands, the remaining color draining completely from his skin. The hard karma hadn't just knocked on his door, it had kicked it completely off the hinges. Because of the viral dashcam footage, the FBI had quietly opened a massive, retroactive civil rights probe into Mitchell's entire 15-year career. The DOJ didn't just find a few discrepancies, they found a graveyard of ruined lives. Armed with Rostova's testimony, federal agents had executed a no-knock warrant on Mitchell's home and his precinct locker. They found the insurance policy exactly where Rostova said it would be. By the end of the 2-week trial, the absolute scope of his corruption was undeniable. He hadn't just assaulted a teenager. He had systematically framed innocent people to boost his arrest statistics, terrorized minorities to feed his own ego, and stolen thousands in cash from undocumented workers who were too afraid to report him. When the jury finally retreated to deliberate, the suspense was practically non-existent. They returned in less than 4 hours. On the count of deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant, Darren Mitchell, guilty. The foreperson read, her voice steady and resolute. On the count of aggravated assault, guilty. On the count of witness, tampering, and subornation of perjury, guilty. On the count of evidence tampering, guilty. On the federal charge of possessing an unregistered firearm in furtherance of a crime, guilty. Judge Caldwell did not show a solitary ounce of mercy during the sentencing phase. "Mr. Mitchell," the judge said, his voice heavy with disgust as he looked down from the elevated bench. "You were entrusted with the most sacred duty a society can bestow upon a citizen, to protect and serve the vulnerable. Instead, you acted as a cowardly tyrant. You weaponized your authority to terrorize a young man who was doing absolutely nothing wrong, simply because of the color of his skin and the car he was driving. Your staggering arrogance blinded you to the fact that the world is no longer entirely in the dark. You are sentenced to 28 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. This sentence will be served consecutively, without the possibility of early parole." The heavy wooden gavel slammed down, echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot. Mitchell's legs completely gave out beneath him. 2 burly federal marshals had to physically lift him by his armpits to drag him away from the defense table. As he was hauled down the center aisle, past the crowded gallery, his panicked, tear-filled eyes locked onto the first row. Jamal Crawford was sitting perfectly straight. His injured shoulder was fully healed. He was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit, a shiny Georgetown University lapel pin gleaming under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. The teenager didn't gloat. He didn't smile or sneer. He simply looked at the broken, weeping man being dragged away in heavy steel chains, his expression one of profound, quiet victory. But the universe wasn't done balancing the scales. The karma did not stop at the prison gates. Shortly after the criminal conviction secured Mitchell's physical freedom, Richard Hayes, acting as a private citizen and a deeply protective uncle, spearheaded a massive, unrelenting civil lawsuit against Mitchell on behalf of the Crawford family. Without the police union to fund his defense, Mitchell was legally slaughtered. The Crawfords won a staggering multi-million-dollar judgment. To satisfy the crushing debt, the state aggressively stripped Mitchell of his police pension entirely. They seized his bank accounts and forced the immediate liquidation and sale of his suburban home. His wife, disgusted by the revelations of his secret life and facing total financial ruin, filed for divorce and took sole custody of their children, legally changing their last names to distance themselves from his toxic legacy. Darren Mitchell entered the bleak, violent federal prison system as a disgraced, penniless ex-cop, the absolute most dangerous and despised label a man can carry on the inside. He had zero money on his commissary books, no loyal brotherhood to protect him in the yard, and no silver badge to hide behind. Every single day, he experienced the very terror, isolation, and agonizing helplessness he had so gleefully inflicted upon innocent citizens for over a decade. Meanwhile, on a crisp, late August morning, Jamal Crawford packed his bags into the trunk of a pristine, midnight blue Chrysler 300. With his brother Elijah riding shotgun and his uncle waving from the driveway, Jamal put the car in drive. He steered out of Oak Ridge, heading toward his freshman year at Georgetown, leaving the absolute ashes of a corrupt cop's legacy disappearing far behind him in his rearview mirror. The story of Officer Mitchell and Jamal Crawford serves as a chilling reminder that unchecked power thrives only in the shadows. But technology has fundamentally altered the landscape of accountability. Mitchell's downfall was not a sudden stroke of bad luck. It was the inevitable collision of systemic arrogance meeting undeniable high-definition truth. He believed his badge was an absolute shield against consequence, failing to realize that the very people he sought to oppress possessed the tools to expose his malice. The swift and total destruction of his life, losing his freedom, his pension, and his legacy, illustrates the ruthless efficiency of justice when armed with irrefutable evidence. Ultimately, this narrative is a testament to resilience and the profound, shifting balance of power. It proves that the darkest acts of corruption cannot withstand the glaring, unrelenting light of a rolling camera, ensuring that profound karma always collects its debts.